I was his comfort, but he was never my future. That truth didn't arrive loudly. It unfolded slowly, like morning light creeping across a room you've lived in for years but never fully examined. In the beginning, everything felt steady. He felt steady. He came into my life at a time when I was tired of chaos, tired of guessing games, tired of people who spoke in sparks but disappeared in smoke. He was different. He stayed. He listened. He remembered small things about me. How I took my coffee, which songs made me quiet, the stories about my childhood that I only shared when I trusted someone. And because he stayed, I assumed he was building something. I didn't realize that sometimes people stay not because they're planning a future with you, but because you make their present easier to survive. He would come to me after difficult days, his shoulders heavy with stress, his voice softer than usual. I learned the map of his moods like it was my responsibility. I knew when he needed silence and when he needed reassurance. I knew how to sit beside him without demanding words. I knew how to remind him of his strengths when he forgot them. Being needed felt powerful. It felt intimate. It felt like love. And maybe in some way it was love. But it was love shaped around his needs, not ours. When I spoke about my fears, he listened kindly, but there was a distance in his eyes. He would say, "You're strong. You'll figure it out." And I would nod, convincing myself that independence was a compliment. I didn't notice that I was offering depth while receiving surface-level comfort in return. I didn't notice that he leaned on me in his storms but rarely stepped into mine. Still, I stayed. Because the moments were warm. Because when he smiled at me across the table, it felt like a promise, even if no promise had actually been spoken. There were nights when he held my hand and told me he didn't know what he'd do without me. I wore those words like armor. I mistook dependency for devotion. Before we go further, if stories about almost love, self-worth, and quiet awakenings speak to you, don't forget to subscribe. There's something powerful about recognizing yourself in someone else's journey. At first, I ignored the small hesitations. When people asked what we were, he would say, "We're seeing where it goes." I would laugh it off, pretending the ambiguity didn't echo later when I was alone. I told myself that labels didn't matter, that mature love didn't need definitions. But definitions matter when you're the only one quietly hoping for them. He talked about his dreams often. Career goals, cities he wanted to live in, the kind of life he imagined building. I would listen carefully, searching for a place where I fit inside those dreams. Sometimes he would say, "You'd love it there," and I would hold on to that like evidence. But there was a difference between imagining me visiting his future and imagining me rooted in it. I felt it, even when I tried not to. I started adjusting myself to stay easy. I stopped asking difficult questions. I convinced myself that patience was love in its purest form. I thought if I proved how steady I could be, he would eventually see me not just as comfort, but as commitment. I didn't realize I was slowly negotiating with my own worth. The turning point wasn't dramatic. There was no betrayal, no explosive argument. It was a quiet afternoon when he told me about an opportunity in another city. His excitement was contagious. His eyes were bright, his words quick with possibility. He spoke about new beginnings, new spaces, new people. I listened, smiling, waiting for the sentence that would include me. Waiting for the part where he would say, "And I want us to build this together." But that sentence never came. Instead, he said, "You'll always be my person." Always his person, but never his plan. The realization settled in my chest like a stone. I walked home that evening replaying every memory with new clarity. The way he avoided long-term conversations. The way he kept his independence fiercely protected while enjoying the stability I gave him. The way he loved me most when he needed something. It wasn't cruelty. He wasn't malicious. He simply wasn't choosing me in the way I deserved to be chosen. And sometimes the most painful heartbreak is not caused by betrayal, but by imbalance. In the weeks that followed, I began questioning myself more than him. Why had I accepted so little clarity? Why did I feel grateful for crumbs? The answer hurt, because being someone's comfort felt safer than risking being no one's priority. I was afraid that if I asked for more, he would leave. So I had chosen uncertainty over loss. But uncertainty is its own kind of loss. It erodes you slowly. When I finally gathered the courage to speak, my voice surprised me with its steadiness. I told him I loved him, but I couldn't keep standing outside his future while being the center of his storms. He looked genuinely conflicted. He said I meant everything to him. And I believed him. That was the complicated part. I believed that he cared. But care without commitment leaves you suspended. He said he wasn't ready for something defined. He said he didn't want to lose me. And I realized he didn't want to lose what I provided, not necessarily what we could become. That clarity changed me. Choosing to step back felt like stepping off a cliff. The first nights were the hardest. My fingers hovered over my phone more times than I can count. I missed our routines. I missed being the person he confided in. I missed feeling essential. But slowly, the silence began teaching me something I had forgotten. I existed outside of him. I began reconnecting with parts of myself I had placed on pause. I spent evenings with friends I had neglected. I returned to hobbies that once made me feel alive. I sat alone with my thoughts without immediately reaching for his validation. And in that solitude, I started seeing the pattern more clearly. I had mistaken being needed for being valued. They are not the same. Being needed means someone relies on what you give. Being valued means someone is willing to build with who you are. There's a difference between being someone's refuge and being their partner. Refuge is temporary. Partnership is intentional. He reached out occasionally, his messages warm and nostalgic. He said he missed our conversations. He said no one understood him the way I did. And for a moment, the old version of me wanted to return. It would have been so easy to slip back into familiarity. But I had learned that familiarity is not fulfillment. Each time I resisted, I reclaimed a piece of myself. Healing didn't look dramatic. It looked like small decisions made consistently. It looked like not responding immediately. It looked like not rereading old messages before bed. It looked like trusting that the emptiness I felt was not proof that I made the wrong choice, but evidence that I was detoxing from a dynamic that fed on imbalance. Over time, the ache softened. I began to understand that love without direction can feel warm, but it can't sustain you. I didn't regret loving him. I regretted shrinking for him. I regretted convincing myself that patience would transform potential into permanence. One day, I heard he had moved to that new city. I imagined him unpacking boxes, arranging his new life. And instead of heartbreak, I felt something unexpected. Peace. Because for the first time, I wasn't waiting for someone to choose me. I was choosing myself. And if this part of the story feels familiar to you, if you've ever been someone's comfort but never their certainty, don't forget to subscribe, because recognizing your worth is the first step toward protecting it. What I didn't expect was how much deeper the lesson would go. Stepping away didn't just create distance between us. It created space within me. Space to examine why I had been so willing to accept half-promises. Space to question the beliefs I had carried about love for years. I realized I had romanticized endurance. I thought staying, even when things were unclear, made me loyal. I thought loving someone through their confusion proved my strength. But love is not a test of how much ambiguity you can tolerate. It's not a waiting room where you sit quietly hoping your name will finally be called. In the months that followed, I started noticing patterns from my past. This wasn't the first time I had chosen someone emotionally unavailable. It wasn't the first time I had tried to earn permanence through patience. There was a part of me that believed if I could be calm enough, understanding enough, indispensable enough, someone would eventually realize they couldn't live without me. But real love isn't about becoming irreplaceable through service. It's about being chosen without audition. I began therapy. I began journaling. I began asking myself uncomfortable questions. Why did chaos feel familiar? Why did clarity sometimes feel boring? Why did I equate intensity with intimacy? Slowly, the answers surfaced. I had grown up believing love required proving yourself, that if you were easy, helpful, strong, you would be safe. And so I carried that blueprint into adulthood, confusing emotional labor with emotional connection. Letting go of him forced me to rewrite that blueprint. There were days I missed him so much it felt physical. I would hear a song we loved and have to sit down. I would pass a cafe we used to visit and feel memories rush in like waves. Healing is not linear. Some mornings I woke up confident, proud of myself for walking away. Other nights I questioned everything. But even in doubt, I didn't go back. Because beneath the longing was a deeper knowing. I deserved a love that didn't require negotiation with my own needs. As time passed, I started meeting new people. Not with urgency, not with the intention to replace him, but with curiosity. And something surprising happened. I began to notice red flags earlier. I began to value clarity over chemistry. I began to ask direct questions instead of hoping answers would magically appear. The version of me who had once been afraid to define relationships was now unafraid to say, "What are we building?" That shift felt powerful. It felt adult. It felt like self-respect. Eventually, I met someone who didn't hesitate when speaking about the future. Someone who didn't just lean on me during hard days, but also asked how to support me during mine. The difference was subtle but profound. I didn't feel like I was auditioning. I didn't feel like I was proving. I felt chosen. And that feeling, steady, mutual, intentional, made me realize how much I had once settled for. Looking back, I don't see my time with him as wasted. I see it as necessary. He taught me the difference between being wanted and being valued. He taught me that love can be real and still not be right. He taught me that sometimes you can be deeply important to someone and still not be included in their destiny. And most importantly, he taught me that walking away from almost love makes space for aligned love. I no longer measure connection by how intensely someone needs me. I measure it by how clearly they see me in their tomorrow. I no longer confuse silence with depth or ambiguity with mystery. I no longer shrink to fit inside someone else's uncertainty. Instead, I stand fully in my expectations, unafraid of losing anyone who cannot meet them. Because the right person won't see your standards as pressure. They'll see them as alignment. Today, when I think about him, there's no bitterness. There's gratitude. Not for the imbalance, but for the awakening. I was his comfort during a chapter of his life. But I am no longer willing to be anyone's temporary shelter. I am building something lasting, with someone who speaks about us without hesitation, with someone who doesn't keep one foot out the door. And even more importantly, I am building a life that feels full on its own. A life where love adds to my peace instead of becoming the source of my anxiety. If you've ever found yourself in a relationship where you are the safe place but not the chosen future, let this be your reminder. You are not asking for too much. You are asking the wrong person. There is a difference. And the moment you realize that difference is the moment you begin stepping into the love you truly deserve. The months after stepping away from him were quiet but transformative. I began to notice the rhythm of my own life without constantly calibrating to someone else's moods, the small liberties of waking up and deciding how I wanted to spend the day without anticipating his approval, without wondering if my happiness threatened him. Mornings became mine, long stretches of sunlight spilling across a room I no longer shared, and with each sunrise I felt a tiny but undeniable surge of freedom. I started to write again, filling journals with thoughts I had once suppressed to maintain the illusion of patience and devotion. I painted in the afternoons, letting colors spill onto canvases without asking permission, allowing mistakes and unexpected strokes to exist without apology. Friends who had drifted away came back, tentative at first, but the warmth of real connection reminded me what it felt like to be seen without negotiation. Slowly, I understood that the love I craved was not built on who I made myself to be for someone else, but on who I authentically was when no one was watching. I learned to recognize the subtleties of relationships, the difference between care and commitment, between attention and presence. between warmth and alignment. Sometimes he reached out, his messages casual, nostalgic, but the old pull I once felt was replaced by clarity. I read his words, smiled briefly, and let them pass without altering my peace. There was no bitterness, only a clear-eyed understanding of how imbalance masqueraded as intimacy, how dependency was often mistaken for affection, and how I had allowed myself to shrink to fill a space that was never meant to expand with me. I began meeting new people, not in a rush, not to fill a void, but out of curiosity, with a gentle, cautious excitement. I asked questions earlier, noticed hesitation, and no longer glossed over signs that might have once seemed trivial but carried the weight of misalignment. Every connection was measured not by intensity or neediness, but by mutuality, by how clearly the other person saw me in their future, and how their presence complemented my own life instead of defining it. Weeks turned into months, and I started to build a life that was fully mine, a career path I had been deferring, mornings of uninterrupted meditation, nights of laughter with friends who celebrated my victories without envy or subtle comparisons. I discovered rituals that made me feel grounded, morning walks, cooking meals I loved without compromising for anyone else, learning new skills simply for the joy of growth. Each day of independent living was a lesson in reclamation. Each evening of silence taught me that I was complete without external validation. And in this space, a subtle shift happened in my understanding of love. Love, I realized, should not be a tether to weakness or a mirror for dependency. True love was a choice made with eyes open, a partnership that amplified rather than diminished, a connection that welcomed wholeness instead of requiring repair. Occasionally, I thought of him, of the comfort he had provided, and I allowed myself to feel gratitude rather than regret. Gratitude for the clarity his absence brought, for the awakening that allowed me to see the difference between being needed and being cherished, between being tolerated and being chosen. And then I met someone different, someone who approached life with steadiness, who communicated desires and intentions clearly, who supported me while expecting nothing but authenticity in return. With him, I could be both strong and vulnerable without the fear that my growth would drive him away. I noticed how effortless it felt to trust, how natural it was to share dreams, how invigorating it was to build plans without negotiating the value of my presence. The contrast was stark, yet gentle a reminder that what I had experienced before was not a flaw in me, but a mismatch in alignment. Over time, I recognized that the chapters of Almost Love were essential, not for sorrow, but for education. They taught me where my boundaries lay, what I would no longer accept, and what it meant to stand fully in my expectations. They taught me that patience should never be confused with compromise, that waiting is only valuable when mutual, and that the courage to leave the familiar can open doors to the extraordinary. My days became richer not because someone finally valued me, but because I valued myself enough to demand consistency, clarity, and respect. I cultivated joy independently, and love became an additive, not a necessity for survival. I realized that I would always carry memories of him, not as a wound, but as a reference point, a benchmark for growth and understanding. I no longer measured connection by intensity or the dependence it inspired. I measured it by alignment, by how naturally presence and intention coexisted, by how freely love could exist without compromising selfhood. In the quiet of my apartment, amidst the routines I had constructed with deliberate care, I felt an enduring sense of peace. I had survived heartbreak not by rushing into new attachments, not by burying feelings, but by observing, reflecting, and reclaiming my life in incremental, intentional ways. I recognize that healing is cumulative, built from small victories, the refusal to apologize for asserting needs, the choice to leave conversations that diminished me, the practice of saying no when it was essential, the courage to embrace solitude as a teacher. And slowly, without dramatic gestures, without declarations of triumph, I became whole. I discovered that being alone with oneself is not loneliness, it is presence. Presence in my own mind, body, heart, and spirit. Presence that allowed me to choose who I shared time with, to invest energy without sacrificing authenticity, to expect reciprocity without guilt. The world around me began to respond differently. Opportunities emerged not because I was striving to be indispensable, but because I operated from clarity and confidence. People who resonated with my energy stayed, those who did not simply drifted away, and their departure no longer felt like failure but like refinement. Each day was a confirmation that independence is a foundation for connection, that self-respect is magnetic, and that love that respects growth is sustainable. By the time I fully recognized it, the fear that once dictated my choices had evaporated. I no longer worried that choosing myself would leave me isolated. On the contrary, choosing myself expanded my capacity for authentic connection. I could love deeply, freely, intentionally, without fear of losing my identity. And in that truth, I found liberation. My heart, once held hostage by imbalance and uncertainty, now navigated life with discernment and courage. I looked back not to lament, but to appreciate the trajectory, from comfort that stifled to self-possession that empowered, from dependency that limited to freedom that attracted, from almost love that blurred vision to alignment that clarified it. I understood that the right kind of love is not measured by sacrifice alone, but by the ability to grow together without surrendering selfhood. In this evolution, I finally understood the essence of a partnership: to amplify, not consume; to stand beside, not above; to cherish, not need. And as I sit here, writing these reflections, I realize how far I've come. No longer willing to shrink, no longer willing to negotiate for crumbs, no longer willing to accept future,